Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bannon Oration for 2025. I'd like to specially welcome Angela Bannon, Professor John Williams and Dr. Wendy Rymans, St Mark's board members, current and past, Professor Don Markwell, the former head of college, and Cameron Akehurst, who's the president of our Old Collegians Association, and to all you, our honoured guests here this evening. We also welcome our online audience to be part of this very important occasion, annual occasion at St Mark's College. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which St Mark's College is situated, the Kaurna people, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land, and we acknowledge that these are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. It really is my great pleasure to continue with our annual oration, now in its 7th year, in memory of the Honourable Dr. John Bannon AO, the 7th Master of the College, from 2000 to 2007, and before that he was Premier of South Australia from 1982 to 1992. John Bannon is remembered with deep affection, respect and gratitude for his contribution to St Mark's during his tenure, and also for his service to the wider community in many capacities, not least as Premier, as I mentioned earlier. I'm very grateful to our centenary historians, Dr. Carolyn Collins and Associate Professor Paul Sendziuk, for producing an excellent account of our last 100 years, which I hope you will all agree has done justice to our history. Paul Sendziuk is our Bannon orator for 2025, and it's my pleasure to ask Professor John Williams to give some background to the oration and to introduce the orator. John has been a great supporter of the oration and has given guidance on content and format along with Angela Bannon and Chris Gent since its inauguration. Professor Williams was the J C Bannon orator in 2021 on the subject of South Australia and the Constitution, a mere provincial contribution. He was a friend of John Bannon and is a distinguished constitutional scholar who John Bannon particularly thanked in his preface to his book, Supreme Federalist, The Political Life of Sir John Downer. Professor Williams is currently Provost at the University of Adelaide and is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Academic for the new Adelaide University. I hope I've got those titles right, John. He was also recently elected as a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia. That is a prestigious and well-deserved appointment. Thank you, John.
Colleagues and friends, firstly may I thank the Chair of the College Board, Linda Matthews, for her generous welcome, and it's the privilege of introducing tonight's John Bannon Oration, J C Bannon Oration. Before I do so, I'd also like to echo your words acknowledging that we meet on Kaurna land. Tonight we're joined with Ms Angela Bannon, Chris and Penny Gent with us, and I'm so pleased to have us with us. May I state my appreciation for the Bannon family for their generous support of this oration. The Bannons and the Gents have their own special connection to the college as former residents and fellow travellers. The J C Bannon Oration, as the former head of the college, Professor Don Markwell AM noted, is, quote, is one of the most significant events in the annual calendar of St Mark's College. Honouring as it does a former undergraduate and the 7th Master of this college. John Bannon was a dear friend and someone I hold in the highest regard. His memory accompanies me daily as I am caught by places we met, conversations we had and ambitions we shared. Recently, I was asked to craft his entry in the Encyclopedic Wakefield Companion to South Australian History. It's a challenge distilling the achievements of such a man into 700 words. After reciting the long list of activities associated with a crowded public life, I reflected on John Bannon, the John Bannon I knew. And I said, quote, alongside public life, he preserved a distinctive but never unsociable personal reserve and privacy. He possessed boundless energy. He was a gifted scholar, a writer, a speaker of wit and eloquence with a prodigious memory. He brought the same self-application of a champion marathon runner as he did to the exuberant mastery of song, of verse, and his love of the arts and the Australian bush. As much as I'd like to welcome the opportunity to memorialise John Bannon, that is not the purpose of tonight's oration, which does have broad scope and ambition. Angela, Chris and myself, with the support of the college, has always seen the oration as a platform for engaging in matters of scholarship and of academic moment and significance. The canvas is indeed broad. It touches on matters associated with John's public and academic interests. These are enduring issues for us all, and they include Australian and South Australian history, the state of the Australian federalism, the arts, sport and its role in Australian life, the environment and sustainability, and international affairs. The condition of our public institutions, be they universities, the Constitution, the national broadcaster or the college, resonate in John's career and provide touchstones for current and further research. Tonight I am pleased to introduce the 2025 J C Bannon Orator. As we have heard, Associate Professor Paul Sendziuk teaches Australian history at the University of Adelaide. His particular expertise is, as we've heard, the Australian immigration, labour, public health and education. An author of 6 books dealing with South Australian history, dealing with the Eye of the Storm, volunteers in Australian response to HIV/AIDS crisis, a significant book as we've heard about, as well as tonight's achievement, and congratulations to you both, Vision and Hope. Paul has appeared not only in the pages of the Academy, but also in public conversation, in television programs, as well as educating as a public intellectual should do, what it means to be an Australian, a South Australian, and what it means to make sense of the world we're in. A collector of colleges, as we've heard, he now has Thomas More, Newman College and St Mark's, and I'm looking to his right, whether Queensland will soon appear with Don Markwell. We're working on it. There's clearly a box set to be had. Colleagues, friends, please welcome our 2025 J C Bannon Orator.
Thank you very much. It's an immense honour and a privilege to be invited to present the J C Bannon Oration this evening. It's already been a wonderful night for me with the launch of the Centenary History an hour or two ago. It's an occasion that I celebrated with 2 or 3 sparkling wines, which now means we're in for a rather wild ride. I'd like to begin also by acknowledging that we gather here on the unceded land of the Kaurna people, from whom I think we have much to learn about the management of and connection to country. I pay my respects to the Kaurna people and their leaders, past, present and emerging. John, thanks very much for that very kind introduction, and I thank John and Angela Bannon and the other members of the Bannon Oration Committee for inviting me here to speak. We also want to acknowledge some other important people in the audience tonight. Chair of the College Board, Linda Matthews, and fellow board members, former and acting heads of St Mark's, Professor Don Markwell, AM, and Stuart Meldrum, my parents, John and Cheryl, who probably win the prize for travelling the furthest, having flown in from Perth for the evening. And I'm also delighted that my co-author, Carolyn Collins, is also in attendance. Carolyn was such a terrific collaborator on our history book, And I want to acknowledge that quite a bit of what I have to say tonight is drawn from her research and writing for that project. And certainly should the oration be published, as it has on previous occasions, her name will be appearing on the cover of the book alongside mine. I had the great pleasure of knowing John Bannon and actually living here with him for 6 months in 2005, while John was still the Master of St Mark's and I was the new lecturer in history at the University of Adelaide. And what a pleasure it was to watch him work, and indeed watch him and his partner Angela work in tandem, presiding over the myriad of college events and activities, providing a firm hand on the rudder as the ship sailed through some occasionally difficult waters. I wrote in the college's centenary history that as a politician, John is remembered as being unflappable, conscientious and pragmatic. But in the company of students and his friends and colleagues, he was also mischievous, funny and a brilliant raconteur with a wide knowledge of many subjects and an interest in seemingly everything and everyone. It's not surprising that he was so well liked and loved even by the students here. I stand by every word that I wrote. John Bannon was also a tremendously hard worker. In my research for the book, I came across a calendar for a 6-week period leading up to the final dinner in 2006. It records that, in that 6-week period, that John attended 21 formal halls and 25 other evening or weekend college events, functions or meetings, including one every Friday night, a schedule that was not exceptional. Formal hall at that time was held from Monday to Thursday, and John entertained students and guests for pre- and post-dinner drinks in the senior common room each night. And on almost every one of those occasions, Angela was by his side. He was a wonderful man and one of St Mark's most distinguished alumni, and I'll speak a bit more about him later on. The topic for tonight's oration, St Mark's and Law, Politics and History, was suggested by the former head, Professor John Markwell, to align with the fields in which John served with distinction. John undertook an arts law degree at the University of Adelaide and lived at St Mark's for a period of time while doing so. He applied his astute legal brain in his capacity as an advisor to various governments and then entered state politics as a Labor member for Ross Smith in 1977, before quickly rising to become leader of his party and then Premier of South Australia between 1982 and 1992. His interest in history endured throughout this time, but became a particular passion once he finished with politics and undertook a PhD in history at Flinders University while serving as Master of St Mark's. In proposing this topic, I think John was hoping that I would profile some of the staff and students of St Mark's who, like John, have had distinguished careers in the fields of history, law and politics. I suspect that he was hoping that I might develop the thesis that St Mark's was crucial to the successful careers made and enjoyed by Mark's men and women. That had it not been for their education here, they might not have made such a contribution. If one was to do so, one would have to engage in what we call counterfactual history. It's a real term. It means to consider what might have happened if they never came to this place. That if, whilst attending university, they lived at home or in a share house, or God forbid, gone to Aquinas. One would also have to discount the gifts that men and later women brought with them when they entered St Mark's. Many came as school captains, champion sportsmen and scholarly prize winners, seemingly destined to do great things no matter where they might have lived during their time at university. And of course, one would have to overlook the fact that there are many Mark's men and women who have failed to achieve as much as the 30-odd Rhodes Scholars or the 2 state premiers or the members of Parliament and Supreme Court judges who have lived and studied at St Mark's. As Carolyn and I chronicled the achievements of the men and women who clearly profited from their time at college, we were aware that there were others who floundered in their courses and in their later endeavours, possibly because their experiences of St Mark's were less cheerful and enabling. St Mark's can be an intimidating and alienating place for some people, and more so in other parts of its history than maybe now. And not everyone who has lived here has been kind to others. In history books such as ours, these people tend to be overlooked, because their experiences were less likely to be recorded in the college archives or in the student publications such as The Lion, which we consulted during our research. And they're less likely to volunteer to be interviewed or share their perspectives in the questionnaires that we circulated, because they've been disconnected from the college and the Collegians Association. So this is my first point about St Mark's and history. When it comes to history, the traces left behind by the people of the past largely accord the achievements of those who win and prosper because their experiences were positive, and silence, through their absence, the voices of those who struggled or left early because their experiences were not. So I'm not prepared to argue that the students of St Mark's reached the pinnacle of their careers in law or politics or history or anything else purely because they attended the college. But I would be happy to make the case that, throughout its history, St Mark's has provided the majority of its students with the most convivial soil from which to grow, offering extraordinary opportunities for learning and making personal connections, and giving forms of assistance that provide advantage to anyone who can navigate the occasional discomfort and compromises of communal living. That is perhaps true now more than at any other time, when alongside the head and the dean, a director of wellbeing and a director of learning and the programs they have put in place offer exceptional support for all kinds of students with different personalities. And a suite of generous bursaries and scholarships ease the financial burden of staying here. The college now has a state-of-the-art learning centre, IT infrastructure, and academic support provided by about 60-odd tutors in about 200-odd subjects. I'm not surprised that some of the best and brightest school leavers are enticed to apply to stay here, and that many succeed once they do. Last year, for example, St Mark's students passed about 95% of the subjects they undertook at university, and the students achieved distinction and high distinction grades in more than half of these subjects. But because I'm uncomfortable with the biographical approach that makes a direct causal link between studying at St Mark's and success, rather than tracing the lives of a few eminent historians and politicians and lawyers who emerged from the college, tonight I want to focus on the times that St Mark's has been especially connected to political affairs and the history of the state and the nation more broadly. That is, after all, one of the things that Carolyn and I tried to do in our book. As I relate this history, you'll be introduced to key individuals and certain politicians and lawyers and jurists and historians who have been connected with the college, but their individual biographies are not my main focus. Does that sound good? So let's begin with a place near where we sit tonight, Downer House, just next to us, built in 1876 and 1877, which was purchased in the 1920s to become the sole building that constituted St Mark's when it opened in 1925. Oh, how it has grown since. Downer House is significant for being the former home of Sir John William Downer, who served as the Premier, Attorney General and Treasurer in the South Australian Parliament, and also as a South Australian Senator in the first Commonwealth Parliament. It was actually built for a fellow called Simon Barnard, who sold it to John Downer in 1880. Now, Downer was one of the men who helped write the Australian Constitution in the years just prior to Federation in 1901. According to a Downer family member, Sir John worked on the draft of the Constitution in Downer House with Sir Edmund Barton and Mr Justice O'Connor at the National Convention held in Adelaide in 1897. A brass plaque with an inscription to this effect was donated to the college in 1935. The college's first master, Archibald Grenfell Price, who amongst his many accomplishments wrote history books, doubted the veracity of this story. Having investigated the matter somewhat, he felt that, quote, on the whole, I won't use his voice, on the whole, it seems unlikely the drafting committee ever officially met to draft the Constitution in Downer House, and it's probable that only Sir Edmund and Sir John had unofficial conversations there. Close enough, I reckon. What was beyond doubt was that the property had clear associations with the history of South Australia as the home of a two-time Premier and the birthplace of his son, Sir Alexander Russell Downer, known as Alec, who became Commonwealth Minister for Immigration and later Australia's High Commissioner in London. It was the latter's connection to this building that led many years later to the Australian Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, speaking at Downer House on 23 October 1982. He was there to launch a book titled Six Prime Ministers, which had been written by Alec Downer shortly before his death. At the request of Lady Downer, the launch took place there, where Sir Alec was born and Sir John Downer lived. It wasn't the last time that an Australian Prime Minister visited and spoke at the college. In 1997, during the mastership of Robin Ashwin, former Prime Minister Gough Whitlam was invited to speak and entertained a packed gathering in the dining hall. And several current and former state premiers, including Lynn Arnold and Mike Rann, have been invited to Formal Hall and address the students as well. But I digress. The Downer family's connection to St Mark's continued well into the second half of the 20th century. In March 1961, Alec Downer, then the Commonwealth Immigration Minister, approached the College Council with an offer to donate a bronze statue for the pond in the new courtyard to commemorate his father. Design ideas were sought from artists around the country, and the winning one, depicting a willowy St Mark and a miniature lion, was submitted by the sculptor Rosemary Madigan, who was, by happy chance, was the daughter of one of the college's founders, the geologist, polar explorer and academic Cecil Madigan. And Carolyn explores the history of that family beautifully in the college history. At the time, we all are familiar with the statue of St Mark's, and we could all run downstairs and have a look if you wanted. But at the time, the design generated much discussion on the College Council, chiefly about the need for any figure of St Mark to be unequivocally masculine. Some thought that the final design was not. At the statue's unveiling in April 1964, Downer, surrounded by his family, professed his delight with it. But as Carolyn writes in our book, Downer may have been less pleased had he foreseen the role that the fountain would play over the years in the ponding of generations of incoming freshmen. General reviews about the new statue were mixed. The editors of the College Club's magazine, The Groaning Stone, dubbed it St Mark's of the Green Buttocks, but professed to like it because, quote, when we stand next to him, he makes us feel big and strong. Within a few years of St Mark's opening, the state of South Australia was plunged in what became known as the Great Depression, the worst economic and social crisis that the nation had ever experienced. And it hit South Australia harder and earlier than any other state. It wasn't an ideal time to be building the business of a college. In the end, the college needed to make money in order to keep surviving. Nor was it a good time to be a blue-collar worker. In September 1928, waterfront workers at Port Adelaide engaged in a strike action against a new federal award that worsened their working conditions and implemented a system that favoured non-union labour. The new federal award reduced the wharfies' break times, lowered their pays for evening and night shifts, and some other conditions as well. Once non-union volunteer labour was introduced to keep the port operating and to break the strike, the situation escalated into violent conflict. On the 27th of September, for example, between 4,000 and 5,000 unionists and their supporters marched on the wharves, attacking the strike breakers. The volunteer workers, scabs as they were called, were forced to abandon the ships and the wharf, some jumping into the water to escape. Stones, fists and police truncheons were thrown, resulting in injuries to the strikers, police and non-union workers. In response to the violence, the government swore in more than 1,000 volunteers as defence deputies and special constables to protect the non-union workers, and they were armed with rifles and bayonets. At the urging of St Mark's first master, Archie Price, the college's tutors and most of its students joined this civilian militia. They were camped at Fort Largs and were used to patrol the port. The government also released public servants for duty, and many businesses did the same. But the university wasn't happy about the exodus of its staff and students, given that exams were looming. Price came under some criticism within the university for encouraging the students to join the action. Concerned that he might have overstepped his authority, he appealed to the College Council for retrospective approval. Given many of its members had also joined the militia, the council enthusiastically endorsed Price's actions. Ultimately, the strike failed, and after 2 weeks of enduring Camp Stew, the students returned to the college and settled down to prepare for exams. This wasn't the last time that St Mark's men or their master would become embroiled in the politics of the era. In early 1931, alarmed by what he regarded as the high risk of inflation, the spread of communism during the Depression, and what he viewed as militant socialism of the federal Labor government, Archie Price published a pamphlet titled The Menace of Inflation. He was subsequently invited to lunch at the Adelaide Club, where he was recruited by the president of the South Australian Liberal Federation to head a new emergency committee that would oppose the Labor government. In April 1931, representatives of the state's various non-Labor groups attended a meeting at Downer House where the Emergency Committee of South Australia was established. It supported strict monetary policies and threw its support behind the newly formed United Australia Party, not to be confused with Clive Palmer's political organisation. That emergency committee is credited with helping to deliver a united Conservative vote and 6 of South Australia's 7 federal seats to the United Australia Party, which then defeated Labor in the 1931 federal election. Archie Price became even more politically active during the Second World War, when, incidentally, the college campus on Pennington Terrace here was closed and given over to the Royal Australian Air Force to be used as an embarkation depot for aircrew. Price was approached by a friend at a radio network to broadcast nightly commentaries about world events, and he jumped at the opportunity to arouse the nation about the gravity of war. Between October 1939 and May 1941, he broadcast 6 nationally syndicated evening commentaries per week, preparing them in between his college duties during the day. Now, Don, you worked hard, but I don't know if you would ever be able to achieve that kind of output. Price also regularly discussed world events with St Mark's students, warning them to prepare for the worst. But not all St Mark's residents shared the master's concern about the war. The crisis in Europe was the subject of some fiery debates amongst university students. Some, such as student Geoffrey Dutton, who had become an acclaimed author and historian, rejected militarism and its symbols that were angry, and its symbols, and was angry. He said that, quote, "Through no fault of our own and with no say of our own, fatuous British politicians had dragged us into the war that might have been prevented by more courageous action earlier on." So views clearly at odds with his masters. In April 1940, a group of left-wing university students and staff formed a radical club, which included some members of the college community, which was very vocal against the war and really advocating socialism and communism. The club was quickly banned for the duration of the war by the University Council, of which Archie Price was a member. During the war, in May 1941, Price was approached by the Liberal and Country League, a forerunner to the Liberal Party, to contest a by-election in the federal electorate of Boothby, called after the death of a sitting member. It was a by-election Conservatives viewed as vital in winning in order to secure the Menzies government's tenuous 1-seat majority in Parliament. Price had a strong public profile thanks to his work with the Emergency Committee and more recently with his war broadcasts. He sought and was granted approval from the College Council to run. It was also agreed that there was no reason for him to resign as master, given the college's current arrangements, even if this new job would take him away from Adelaide for up to 4 months a year. Price won the by-election, and on the 29th of May 1941, he was sworn in as the federal member for Boothby. It would not be a long political career, however. He lost his seat at the next general election in August 1943. In the meantime, he juggled his parliamentary and master's duties, inspecting the college's property and student accommodations on weekends when he was at home. While he was away, he relied heavily on his secretary, Mrs. Keane, whom he paid out of his own salary to keep in touch with his students and supervise their activities. Several students who entered St Mark's in the 1940s, the period we're talking about, went on to have prominent public careers. Foremost amongst them, entering in 1946, was Donald Dunstan, a second-year law student who had grown up in Fiji and later served as the Labor Premier for South Australia. He was joined by a future Liberal Legislative Council member, Don Laidlaw, who during the war had served in various capacities as an interpreter. The two Dons had rooms in the new wing on either side of Archie MacArthur, whose room became a popular venue for late-night political discussions. MacArthur recalled that Dunstan was, at that time, incongruously being courted by senior Liberals, while also serving as the university's socialist club. Dunstan was also heavily involved in student theatre during his time at college. Christopher Lego, who resided at St Mark's in 1947, recalled Dunstan organising a production of The Importance of Being Earnest, in which Dunstan played Lady Bracknell. He clearly had some theatrical flair well before the day he wore his pink shorts on the steps of Parliament House. Dunstan's political career was closely watched by fellow collegians. When he became the Attorney-General of South Australia after the 1965 election, the Old Collegians Association warmly congratulated him, noting that he was the first former member of the college to reach a ministerial rank, with or without shorts. Law student Robin Millhouse entered St Mark's in 1947, adding his voice to the late-night political discussions. Millhouse later became a Liberal Member of Parliament, the 39th Attorney-General of South Australia, the first Australian Democrat to be elected to Parliament, and he also served as Judge of the Supreme Court of South Australia and Chief Justice of Kiribati and Nauru. He recalled that while he and Dunstan argued and squabbled about politics during their university days, the older Dunstan always looked out for him. When Millhouse was elected to Parliament in 1955, Dunstan was the first person to send a telegram congratulating him. Millhouse resided at the college between 1947 and 1951 and was a college club secretary in 1951. And I discovered that 3 decades later, his daughter Penny became one of the first women admitted to the college as students and also proved herself to be a marvellous scholar. She achieved distinctions, then the highest university grade, in all of her first-year science subjects in 1985, and then returned the following year to achieve straight distinctions in her first-year art subjects. I'm going to skip forward now to the late 1960s and the 1970s, when Malcolm Mackenzie's mastership of the college coincided with and was shaped by a period of rapid and tumultuous social and political change that occurred in Australia. Well, much of the local unrest in the late 1960s and early 1970s stemmed from objections to Australia's involvement in the Vietnam War and conscription. Vocal campaigns were also being fought for gender and racial equality and for greater power for students to determine their own affairs. Anti-establishment feeling was on the rise, with students at the University of Adelaide and the newly formed Flinders University. Despite their traditionally more conservative backgrounds, St Mark's students were similarly imbued with such spirit, occasionally bringing them into conflict with the college's leaders. Chris Gent, who entered college in 1971, following in the footsteps of his father and his older brother, recalled many heated discussions over Vietnam, women's liberation and religion. He remembered, quote, "There was a climate of having discussions and looking at ideas in a sort of fearless and adult way. At college dinner, you'd often get into an argument with someone about something," end quote. In 1968, Master Mackenzie himself presented a paper to the Senior Common Room on the theology of revolt. As Master, Mackenzie reviewed some of the college's traditions, simplifying rules and giving students greater responsibility and leadership. Some rules and traditions were relatively straightforward to update. Visiting hours for female guests were extended, stopping them having to be hidden under the beds when the master came in. Students were allowed to host private parties, and rules over keeping of alcohol in students' rooms were relaxed. In 1969, student leaders sought representation on the college council, an issue first raised by the college club in 1948. This time there was a more positive response from the college's leadership, and in 1970, Tim Brooks became the first president of the college club to be appointed ex officio to the college council on an annual basis. That year, the gate book, used by students to sign in and out of the college when they came in and went, was also abolished. However, some traditions were inviolable. Mackenzie refused, for example, to accede the demand by a vocal minority to abolish academic gowns and formal dinners. Other undergraduates objected to having to give deference to the high table and the ritual segregation of the junior and senior common rooms at formal hall and at after-dinner coffee. Meanwhile, protests over conscription in the Vietnam War were growing in strength and in the community, culminating in the nationwide moratorium marches of 1970 and 1971. The issues were also hotly debated at St Mark's. In April 1969, 2 St Mark's students were among 54 people arrested for trespassing after taking part in what Mackenzie described as an unruly student protest rally against conscription in Adelaide. An editorial in the Anglican press at the time deplored the boorish and antisocial behaviour of Australian students and called for firm measures to curb the lawlessness. By contrast, St Mark's leadership employed a lighter hand, with a focus on limiting negative publicity for the college rather than clamping down on participation in the protests. One of the great political fights of the late 1960s and 1970s was for women's liberation. This campaign was probably pursued with less vehemence at St Mark's because at the time, women were not allowed to attend the college as students, nor did they hold any academic or senior staff positions. Accordingly, they've been largely absent from my talk so far, even though, as Carol and I relate in the book, women performed essential behind-the-scenes roles in the establishment of the college in the 1920s, and since that time served as matrons, cleaning and kitchen staff. Quite simply, the college could not function without them. But none were students, and hence none could claim to have gone on to distinguished careers in the fields of law, politics or history. That was to change, however, when for the first time in the history of the college, for the first time in its history, the college seriously considered the admission of women as students. This was mostly not due to the influence of feminism or women's liberation. Rather, the higher education sector was changing and women were coming to constitute a larger portion of university enrolments. If the college was only selling itself to male students, it would be relying on a diminishing pool. By the late 1970s, the college routinely struggled to fill its accommodation, and 30 to 40 rooms went unoccupied, resulting in a long sequence of end-of-year financial losses. Nevertheless, securing the admission of women was not easy. In 1972, the College Council considered the matter but never put it to a vote, determining that the time was not right, despite all of the other Adelaide-based university colleges going co-ed, and most of the interstate Anglican residential colleges doing likewise. A vote on the issue was taken by the College Council in 1978 and 1979, the first years of the mastership of Peter Edwards, when the college's financial situation was bleak, bringing an end to hot breakfasts, the curtailment of the tutorial program, and the introduction of voluntary student labour. During both votes, leaders of the Student Club, Old Collegians Association, and most members of the Anglican clergy who sat on the College Council opposed the introduction of women, claiming that the culture and traditions of the college, and possibly the academic standards, would be irrevocably damaged. A 2/3 majority of the council was required to vote in favour of the proposition, and on each occasion it was defeated by a single vote. The debate caused a lot of bad blood between the student body and Master Peter Edwards, who was stridently advocating for the case for co-education. And Edwards then implored the council to defer considering the matter again for some time to allow that relationship to heal. Following further financial losses, and facing the prospect of St Mark's needing to merge with one of the other residential colleges in order to survive, a third vote was undertaken on the issue by Council in April 1981. This time, the proposition to admit women succeeded, and the first cohort of nearly 40 women were welcomed into college in 1982. In preparation for their arrival, a young PhD student by the name of Jenny McKee was made a residential assistant tutor of the college with the aim of casting a woman's eye over aspects of the college that needed to change to accommodate women. Jenny later joined the ranks of the distinguished lawyers that I've been talking about. Between 1988 and 1983, she worked as a solicitor for Finlayson's in Adelaide, and in 1992, she was appointed the Professor of Business Law at the University of South Australia, a position she still holds. Bright-eyed Claire Thompson was amongst the first cohort of women admitted in 1982, and has also risen through the ranks of barristers and solicitors in Western Australia, becoming the president of the Law Society there in 2002, and being appointed as senior counsel in 2021. She was one of the instigators of the establishment of a scholarship for St Mark's women that emerged from a dinner that was celebrated the 30th anniversary of co-education at St Mark's, held in 2012. Female politicians and high-level bureaucrats have also risen through the ranks of St Mark's, also risen from the ranks of St Mark's as well. Most recently, Ashton Hearn, who studied here in 2009, who was elected as a Liberal member for Schubert in the South Australian House of Assembly in 2022. So a monumental change occurred in the college under Peter Edwards. I also discovered that an array of fascinating people were invited to speak to students at the college at that time. In 1978, for example, Dr. Ted Cleary, a pathologist associated with the Right to Life movement, and a Member of Parliament, Anne Levy, a feminist and trained geneticist, were invited to debate the question of abortion. In 1980 and 1981, junior Common Room members Charles Matheson and Richard Brown organised several entertaining Porton talks that featured, for example, a debate between the proponents of creationism and evolution, and what was quoted as an enjoyable and stimulating discussion about the respective merits of the monarchy and republicanism, with the guest speakers being Sir Walter Crocker, who was Lieutenant Governor of South Australia, and the author and old collegian Geoffrey Dutton. In the lead up to the 1980 federal election, Master Edwards himself organised Liberal and Labor Party candidates to address students and answer questions. He invited Ian Wilson, a Liberal MP for Sturt, and Neil Blewett, Labor MP for Benithon, who ultimately was unable to attend due to a family illness. He was replaced by Andrew Duncan, the Labor candidate for Sturt. As Edwards remarked, quote, "We thus have the father of one marksman and the son of another as the two speakers." Edwards' statement here reminds us both of the exceptional privileges enjoyed by St Mark's students, who were given access to these kinds of people and opportunities to engage in political and legal debates, but also the esteemed careers and public service to which it was hoped many marksmen and women would aspire. And there was an abundance of role models. At the time, 7 collegians were sitting or about to sit in state and federal parliament. These were Don Laidlaw, Robin Millhouse, John Bannon, Lance Milne, John Burdett, James Porter and Robert Hill. And when Millhouse was elevated to the Supreme Court of South Australia in 1982, he joined 3 other marksmen on the bench, with Rod Matheson, Andrew Wells and Robert Moore. Also at the time, former collegians William Forster and Richard Blackburn, who were knighted by the Queen in 1982 and 1983 respectively, held the positions of Chief Justice of the Supreme Courts of the Northern Territory and the Australian Capital Territory. With all due respect to those eminent individuals, I think it was John Bannon who made the greatest contribution to public life, and more importantly to St Mark's as its 7th master between 2000 and 2007. Bannon had attended the college as a student in 1962 and 1963. In addition to his studies, he participated and often excelled in a number of sports. He wrote scripts and performed in plays. He debated. He edited the student newspaper and was later elected president of a bunch of student representative bodies. He was already political and on the left side of the equation and with a mischievous mindset. He recalled that he and a mate once dressed up as footmen and went to the Adelaide Club at lunchtime to make nuisances of themselves by standing outside and saluting and pressing the bell for members as they came and went. He was trying to draw attention to the existence of the home of conservatism as he saw it. When he graduated, Bannon applied this critique of conservatism in more productive ways, working for the trade union movement and then the Labor Party before entering politics himself and becoming Premier of South Australia. By the time he retired a decade later, he was the second longest serving Premier in the state's history. As Premier, he was credited, not least by me in my History of South Australia published a few years ago, with revitalising and reorienting the state's economy and continuing some of the social and environmental reforms often associated with Don Dunstan's government. Bannon maintained a connection with St Mark's during this time, occasionally participating in old collegians events and accepting Robin Ashwin's invitation to speak at a final dinner. His government also invited the college's fifth master, the Reverend Peter Thompson, to chair an advisory committee on social welfare in the 1980s. Upon retiring from politics and after serving as a director of the ABC in the 1990s, there was therefore enough connection for Bannon to be interested in applying for the position of master once Ashwin resigned towards the end of 1999. Despite his accomplishments, his appointment was not a fait accompli. Bannon's departure from politics had been occasioned by the collapse of the state bank, which at the time cost the state's taxpayers billions of dollars. As leader and treasurer of the government that was partly responsible for overseeing the state bank's activities, Bannon was blamed for the bank's collapse. According to some people, at least one member of this college council strongly opposed his appointment as master. He was thus, as Angela Bannon recalls, excited and thrilled when it was announced that he was a successful candidate. Within the first week of their arrival during orientation in the year 2000, the Bannons woke to find, as Angela described it, a fairy sleeping in the garden of the lodge. This fairy was a female student who had obviously had too much to drink and passed out before she could make it back to her room. A day or two later, the Bannons were roused in the middle of the night by a student having a coughing fit in the nearby Hawker Annex and had to rush that student, who was having a severe asthma attack, to hospital. Angela recalled that she and John looked at each other and wondered, what have they got themselves into? We are certainly glad that they decided to stay. Much could be said about the Bannons' contribution as master of the college, and certainly more could be said about the politicians, lawyers and jurists who have emerged from St Mark's, and about the college's connection to political affairs and the broader history of the state and nation. But I don't really need to. It's already been written down over there. The history of St Mark's promises illumination for those who are willing to spend a few enjoyable hours reading. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. There's a lot to digest there, isn't there? And I think you've probably whetted the appetite of anyone here. I'm sure you all have a book, but you may be encouraged to get a copy for friends or relatives. But we're going to open up a short time for questions. Paul has agreed to do that. So would anyone like to start with a question?
Take questions, comments. Yes, sir.
You mentioned with Archie Grenfell Price and his role with the United Australia Party and those elements also of the strikebreakers. He was also an editorial writer, wasn't he? A leader writer for the Advertiser?
Oh, he was prolific. He was very involved. And we talked about public intellectuals. He was very engaged in public affairs and took every opportunity he could to get his message. And he had a very particular message. He was quite a conservative fellow in terms of politics. He was very keen to get that message out there. I was, again, Carolyn did the research for that part of the book, and I was kind of amazed by how willing he was to activate the students to work on his behalf to fulfil some of those political ambitions that he had and some of those, his particular philosophies about life and politics. Yes?
Do you think Don Dunstan had quite an effect on the college, particularly on the commencement of women?
Did Don Dunstan have an effect on the college in terms of the commencement of women being here? I wouldn't make that link, no. Was that what the question was? Yes. Yeah. No, I don't think so. If you read his biography, a wonderful biography written by Angela Woolacott, she investigated his life here at the college. She didn't argue it was tremendously influential in his politics or how he was going to live his life. Those things had been fairly well developed by the time he got here. Certainly didn't retain the connection with the college the way in which someone like John Bannon did once he had left. Yes?
With the strike breakers, was there support from within the student body to go and patrol the docks? Was that mainly... I'll start again. With the strike breakers, was there a lot of support from within the student body to go and patrol the docks, or was it more...
We don't have a lot of the students' voice sort of explaining that. So it's more about just what had happened. Certainly some of them would have taken it as a bit of a boys' own adventure, get dressed up, grab a rifle. I think from memory also they were given rifles and bayonets but no ammunition. I think it was more of a show of force and defiance. Yeah, a little bit like Dad's Army, but a young Dad's Army. It was a two-week period. I think if it had gone on and on, they may have lost their enthusiasm for it and reluctantly come back to study for their exams. Yes.
Does the book pick up on the impact of the Depression on the viability of the college in 1930, 31, 32, because of the turmoil which you touched on that impacted?
It absolutely does, because some of the ones most affected in the Depression were the farmers, because of the drops in commodity prices just completely collapses, really affects the South Australian economy, and that's where the college was seeking to gain students from the families of farming families. They had to offer discounts for fees. Students certainly left the college because they couldn't afford to be here. And from memory, Carolyn, that's the time they first established the first scholarship as well, to try to attract students and some of the best students to come into the college, to try to pick up its reputation for scholarly excellence, which might then attract other students to come. So, it was absolutely, when Price became the master, he was given very firm instructions that this place had to make money. They had to be able to turn a profit within a certain number of years. They started with nine students, so that was a hard thing to do. They didn't have the financial backing that a lot of the other big residential colleges around Australia had at the start. So the fact that it gets established in 1925 and then by 1928 the states plunged into Great Depression really made the college's existence very precarious.
So when Lang, the former New South Wales chap, came over here in the early 30s, did the college invite him to come and talk to them?
No, they did not. In fact, again, Carolyn tells a lovely story in the book about Price organising some college men to go and see Lang off at the train station. It was jeering and shouting and singing of the Australian national anthem, or the British God Save the Queen, I think they would have sang, and giving a right old rotten time of it. Mm.
Well, there was a particular chap, I think it was my father, who threw a stink bomb, Lang.
Yes.
But that story is reported in the press at the time. So it was a very French society emerging.
Absolutely, yes. I wish I'd known about that story for the book. Oh, the story is in the book. Well, there we are. Yes, that's a bit that Carolyn has written. Yes. It's Armin or Amon? Armin.
The church, the cathedral looms over the college.
Mm.
What has been the relationship, and how has the relationship with Anglicanism and the Church of Australia progressed over history, and had an impact on its role in politics?
And you're going to have to wait for the second volume of the college's history, because that is a text in itself, isn't it? Really. What I was surprised about coming to St Mark's and viewing St Mark's and looking at its history, after being at Newman College, which is a Catholic college, it's run by the Jesuits and it's affiliated with the University of Melbourne. What was really struck me here is how the church, the Anglican Church, is really at arm's length, certainly compared to the role of the Catholic Church at Newman College. It's kept things at pretty arm's length. And I think that's probably been to the benefit of the college. When the college was founded, there was debates about whether the master must be an ordained minister, whether only students of the Anglican faith, or the Church of England as it was known, could reside here. And on both of those issues, which were fiercely debated, they came out that no, the college would be open to all, and that you need not be a church minister. And that's certainly not the case for many, or some other, university residential colleges. Yes, Baden.
Paul, congratulations on your oration, and we welcome every part of it. I agree with you. The two great leaders that had an impact on the whole state, not only this college, was Archie and John. And my question is, isn't it the case that they, perhaps more than anyone else, always had the perspective of addressing the whole state, the welfare of the whole state, and to encourage students, whatever their profession, whether it was Archie or John Bannon, to address the needs of the whole state?
Yeah, to see themselves, to look outside of the college walls. I'd hate to rank masters in a way in which we're willing to do that and which ones didn't. I think they actually all did that in their own respects. Someone like Rose Alwyn was who comes after John Bannon and served as one of his dean. She was amazing in terms of getting students to think about service, community service, volunteering. John certainly did that in terms of thinking about the world, but also just getting students out in the community, participating in sport. When he used to go on his morning runs, he used to bring students along with him and they would run through the parklands. He ran nearly 30 marathons, John did, which is incredible. Was he running away from you, Angelo? What makes a man do 30 marathons? But he was always trying to get, students active. And again, it wasn't just, it's not just about your life at the college. It's not just about studying. There's other aspects that we need to nurture in terms of your personality. Yeah, sorry, Baden. I don't think I'll be quite prepared to say that they're the only two that did that. I think all of them did that in their own ways, as any good master would and head would.
We've got time for one more question.
One more right at the back.
One at the back.
I guess I have more of a question about the process of history. I don't really know it's well defined in my head, but I'll give it a go. I'm just interested in, you sort of said sometimes history, well, all the time, history is often about who gets to tell it. And I'm wondering about the process in writing this book, how you were able to consider or capture the aspects of, I guess, the omissions or the silences, or who was left out of that story, and how do you then try and include those people or consider what's missing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. It is a real dilemma. Carolyn and I organised a questionnaire which was sent out through the college e-newsletters, and it had a link to a form which you could fill out. And we asked a series of questions about what was the best aspect of college, who do you remember as being an influential person, and what way did the college impact on your life, etc., etc. But the people who were going to fill that out were people generally who stay connection with the Collegians Association, who 20 years after leaving St Mark's are still interested in getting an e-newsletter from them and wanting to read it all the way to the bottom where the link was to the survey. So, not surprisingly, we had people writing who were so enthusiastic and passionate about the college, and their perspectives are in the book. But it was also quite easy to get their perspectives because they're celebrated in the other publications. The student that leaves halfway through college because they've had a really awful experience, or they just don't feel like the college is for them, or they're not getting the support, that their particular talents maybe aren't being recognised, become disaffected and they move out, it's really hard to get their perspectives. But there is enough written by some dissatisfied and disaffected people who have written things either to Ondi, the student newspaper. Some have become academics and have written about their lives and sort of autobiographies. So there's enough of that material which we've been able to read and incorporate into the book. And we certainly try to place those side by side. And sometimes there's a little bit of imagining that happens as well. We know ourselves that this is likely to happen. And I think that was the great thing about me being a part of 3 colleges and living out as a college as a first-year student and then as a residential tutor. I understood why people sometimes don't fit into colleges and what good colleges do to try to welcome people in. And I think St Mark's really does that incredibly well now, but also how colleges sometimes haven't been so proactive in making sure that that happens.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Paul. I'm going to invite Stuart Meldrum, our Acting Head of College, to come and give a vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Paul. Very, very lovely night, and hopefully it inspires everyone to, I suppose, reflect on their time and their connection with the college. I want to pass on a thanks to you and to Carolyn